It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. After 484 days in captivity, Chapel Hill native Keith Samuel was freed along two other hostages in the fourth wave of release under the Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement. Now, this happened back on February the 1st, very early in the morning on Saturday. Getting some reaction from lawmakers across North Carolina. We'll start with Senator Tom Tillis. He said, quote, "Today, after more than a year in brutal captivity of Hamas, North Carolina native Keith Samuel is finally free and reunited with his family, including his beloved wife, Alviva. This is a moment of great relief and celebration, but we cannot forget about the remaining hostages. I am confident that the Trump administration will continue to work closely with our ally Israel as it seeks to free every remaining hostage. This fragile ceasefire is completely dependent on the behavior of Hamas, and we must remain vigilant." Siegel is not only a Chapel Hill native, but the first American hostage to be released from captivity under this ceasefire agreement. Siegel and his wife were taken captive back on October the 7th amongst 253 other hostages captured by Hamas. His wife, Aviva, was released after 51 days in captivity. Getting some more reaction from other lawmakers, Senator Ted Budd commenting, saying, quote, "We are overjoyed for Keith Samuel and his loved ones that the long nightmare that began on October 7th, 2023 is finally over. Keith is now reunited with his wife and family, fulfilling the prayers of millions across the United States and around the world. Thank you to President Trump for delivering the decisive pressure that brought us to this day. I would also like to thank the U.S. State Department and intelligence community, as well as the governments of Israel, Egypt, and Qatar for their efforts." Budd continued by saying, "I remain committed to securing the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza, especially 6 more Americans. They must not and will not be forgotten. I will continue to work to bring the terrorists who committed these acts to justice for their heinous crimes." Last Monday, it was reported that Siegel would be among the first hostages released on Saturday. Hostages have been released every weekend, with the first round taking place on January the 19th, just one day before President Trump's inauguration, and an additional round released this Thursday of last week. So that is what we are tracking this morning for the latest on the saga surrounding Keith Samuel. He has been released. You can read some additional details this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. There's some nice pictures of him getting welcomed home by his family. Some great images over on our story at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:08, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We've got a set of different updates this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour surrounding former Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Some updates on a legal challenge against CNN, the cable news network, and some interesting details in regards to his future political career. To walk us through it on this Monday morning, Mitch Kokai with the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, some late-breaking news Friday surrounding the former lieutenant governor. What do you got this morning?
Yes, there are two important pieces to this. You might remember, Nick, that late in the campaign for a governor, there was that major article from CNN that talked about Mark Robinson writing some controversial, inflammatory comments on an adult website years before he ran for office. Near the end of the political campaign, Mark Robinson filed a lawsuit against CNN. The suit was also against a former porn store clerk for something that was unrelated, but those two things were tied together, and most of the publicity was about the lawsuit against CNN. CNN eventually had that case moved from state court, where it was filed, to federal court, and then just on Friday, we learned that Mark Robinson was dropping the suit against CNN, also dropping the suit against the former porn store clerk. That was one big news item. But in a statement that went along with that decision to drop the suit, Mark Robinson also indicated that he is not going to run for office next year and has no plans to run for elected office again. Now, saying definitively that he's not going to run for office next year means that unless things change, you take his name out of the calculation for a potential primary run against Thom Tillis for the U.S. Senate. And it looks as if, at least at this point, Mark Robinson is not going to be making himself available to run for any other elected office in the future. A lot of that statement had to deal with his faith, talking about the need to put aside all of these grievances that he has. And he also, in talking about the lawsuit, said that it was clear it was going to be very hard to wage any sort of legal battle against CNN. So he told his legal team to just stop anything on that front. I think probably not too many people are surprised that this suit is now over, but I think more people are probably surprised by the fact that Mark Robinson is definitively saying at this point that he's not going to run for office next year, and is also putting not quite the same finality to it, but pretty much a final statement on not wanting to run for elected office again after serving in his term of office as lieutenant governor.
Well, not only serving in office as the lieutenant governor, as you note, but a very popular figure amongst the grassroots Republican majority here in the state of North Carolina. Whether you like Mark Robinson or not, regardless of his political affiliations or commercials that were things were said about him, Mitch, it was hard to argue that he was not a very popular figure in a lot of conservative Republican circles, not all, but a lot. And now that he's gone, I presume to say that there's some level of vacuum there that now that he's out of these circles.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Now, he had overwhelming support within the Republican Party before some of these things came out late in the campaign, especially the items that were covered in that CNN article. He had already started to see a decline in the polls before that article came out. Democrat Josh Stein, who was running against Robinson for governor, was gaining a lead that looked like 5, 6 or more points in the polls, which is pretty significant in a state like North Carolina. But once that article came out, things really fell apart in his campaign, and he ended up losing by about 15 points. Still had some support among Republican voters, but lost pretty much any support he would have among the independents who can go back and forth, unaffiliated voters who can go back and forth. They didn't vote for him. And a lot of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump, who voted for Republicans below the governor's spot on the ticket, decided to sit this one out and cast no ballot in the governor's race. So while he still had a vocal base of support, it was unclear at this point how many Republicans would vote for Mark Robinson if he decided to run for office again. But I think Thom Tillis's team and anyone who was thinking about trying to unseat Thom Tillis in the next primary had to be wondering what is going to be the Mark Robinson factor. If Robinson's in this race, does this block any other anti-Tillis candidate? If Robinson is in this race, does this mean good news or bad news for Thom Tillis? All of those calculations now out the door because Mark Robinson has said he's not going to be part of that race, which means that in addition to Andy Nielsen, the one candidate who we know of who's going to be running against Thom Tillis for the Republican primary, you could be seeing other candidates out there. And potentially that might have an impact on the other side of the fence. Remember that the two names you're hearing about on the Democratic side are former Governor Roy Cooper, who just left office and is very popular among Democrats and popular among the populace at large, and former Congressman Wiley Nickel, less well known, but has already put his name out there as a Democratic candidate. Mark Robinson saying definitively that he's not going to run, I think, is probably going to send a lot of people in the next few weeks into discussions about, okay, where's the landscape now and who does this look particularly good for?
We'll continue the conversation with Mitch Kokai coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on this Monday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Governor Josh Stein on Friday announced a new $30 million small business grant program that will help businesses who are still recovering from Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina. He made the announcement at the Boone Chamber of Commerce and had this to say, quote, "Small businesses are the heart of western North Carolina and need our support to get through these slow winter months. The Western North Carolina Small Business Grant Program will help small businesses with their urgent needs and support the region's economic recovery. I am proud that these dollars are leveraging additional Dogwood Trust dollars, and I'm grateful to Dogwood for its leadership. Last fall, Dogwood Health Trust created the Western North Carolina Small Business Incentive with grant funding for small businesses, but unfortunately that program has since exhausted all of those funds. The governor said that the state would be partnering with Dogwood Health by contributing $20 million to the trust, while the Asheville-based nonprofit will be adding another $10 million for a new pool of small business grants, upwards of $30 million that they'll have there. Small businesses with annual revenue up to and including $2.5 million a year are eligible to apply for grants of up to $50,000 from the Western North Carolina Small Business Initiative Grant Program. Businesses that were impacted by Helene that lost $13 billion in revenue are eligible. These grants will help businesses make up payroll, as well as pay things like operating expenses and stabilize the local economy as tourism slowly ramps back up. Funds will be managed by the Appalachian Community Capital with partnerships of the Community Reinvestment Fund on the application process. And there is a portal over on our website, carolinajournal.com, or a link rather to a portal where you can go in and click. The eligibility requirements are in businesses with an annual revenue of up to and including $2.5 million, and they must be in one of 28 counties in the western half of the state, including the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians that are covered. That full list is on the website as well. Other organizations that have helped small businesses affected by Hurricane Helene include the Lowe's Home Improvement brand, which established a $2.5 million grant fund in November. With his announcement on Friday, Governor Stein also announced that the state is awarding $3 million to Baptists on Mission and $3 million to Habitat for Humanity North Carolina to support housing repair initiatives that continue in the western half of the state. The General Assembly overrode former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper's veto of Senate Bill 382 in December of last year, which allocated an additional $227 million in disaster relief for western North Carolina. And within just a few days of being in his position as governor, Josh Stein created the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina, or WNC, to focus on some of those recovery efforts in the western half of North Carolina. So we are continuing to track recovery out in the western half of the state. There is still a lot more work to be done, but again, a $30 million small business grant program being announced there by Governor Josh Stein on Friday. You can read more details by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:23, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Continuing our discussion this morning on former North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson with Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation. Well, and Mitch, you invoked the name of President Trump, and we saw immediately after this story, the CNN story, which there was a lawsuit on, as you reported this morning, that's now being dropped. Immediately after that news came out, it appeared that the Trump campaign had completely severed its ties and disconnected with the Robinson campaign. Trump was in, I believe, Wilmington the weekend that this story broke. It broke on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Trump was in the state that Saturday or Sunday. No Robinson invite, and all of his further events that took place in the state between then and Election Day, Mark Robinson was not included in any single one of them. I wonder if his team had some more to say in regards to Robinson going forward.
There were some reports around that time. I don't know that there was ever anything definitively that came out and was authorized by the Trump campaign, but there were some reports that the Trump people basically told Robinson and anyone who was still with him after his major staff departure that, don't come to our events. You're not going to have a chance to get on the stage or get any sort of publicity. And that, of course, was a major change because Donald Trump had said many good things about Mark Robinson and had endorsed him. And in fact, part of the Democrats' strategy of trying to take down Donald Trump in North Carolina was tying him to Mark Robinson. I mean, they tried to tie anyone to Mark Robinson, anyone who not only had ever actually had a closer tie to Mark Robinson, like the Attorney General candidate Dan Bishop, who said he wanted to be Mark Robinson's sidekick, but even people who didn't have any kind of ties to Mark Robinson, if they had an R after their name, Democrats tried to tie them to Robinson. Trump, of course, they tried to tie to Robinson, but it didn't affect him. He ended up winning the state's electoral votes again. But it is possible that folks who are part of the Republican establishment had made it known that the current Republican establishment, not the establishment that Trump fought against, but the current leadership within the Republican Party may have said to Robinson and anyone who's still advising him at this point, look, you're not going to get any backing from us.
Mitch, for going forward in this, there's kind of two different angles and avenues I see this. The Democrats were successful in essentially not only beating Mark Robinson in November of last year, but from his statements that you're reporting this morning, essentially kicking him out of politics. So for them, that would be seen as a win. But on the other side, you just mentioned all of the resources and assets that were poured into other campaigns and other races, tying them to Mark Robinson, as he was this ultra controversial figure that Democrats could use as a punching bag. Now that they've essentially forced him out of politics, I guess they're back to ground one in terms of trying to tie all Republicans to this controversial candidate. That's gone now, presumably.
Yeah, I think that was a one-time trick. It worked to some extent for them in the 2024 campaign, and you could debate it, but I think that there are a number of people who think that some of the other statewide elections and some of the legislative elections that Republicans could have won went to Democrats instead because Josh Stein didn't have to use all of his money to run for governor. He could pump some money into these other campaigns. There's probably going to be years of debate about whether that actually made a difference, but at least some people think that cost Republicans some seats in races that were fairly close down ballot. But that is a one-time thing. Now that Mark Robinson is not going to be in the campaign, even if someone tried to say, well, you supported Mark Robinson, by the time we get to elections in 2026 and certainly in 2028, that will be ancient history for voters. And as long as Mark Robinson himself isn't on the ballot, it's hard to think that any campaign running on the Republican side is going to have to deal with concerns about being too close to Robinson.
Mitch, where can folks go this morning and get some additional details on what you're reporting? You seem to indicate that there was some more verbiage from the former lieutenant governor as to this decision. Where can folks check that out?
Certainly, if they go to carolinajournal.com, they will see our report on Mark Robinson's decision to drop the lawsuit, and they'll also find access to the statement that he put out that talked about his decision not to proceed with the lawsuit against CNN, but also that he's not going to run for office next year and has no plans to run for elected office again in the future.
Mitch, really appreciate the time this morning. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:28, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get another look at traffic on this Monday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, Nick.
5:35 Monday morning. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We are continuing to track details this morning out of the high-stakes race for North Carolina Supreme Court. And Republican State Supreme Court candidate in Jefferson Griffin officially filed paperwork late Friday afternoon asking a federal appeals court to dismiss appeals from the State Board of Elections and his Democrat challenger and current member on the Supreme Court, Allison Riggs. The Election Board and Riggs want the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn a federal trial judge's January the 6th decision to send Griffin's election challenge from federal court back to state court where it was originally filed. North Carolina's highest state court issued an order back on January the 7th, order calling for a stay, which blocked the election board from certifying Riggs as the winner of the November the 5th election. I'll note this is still the only election in the entire United States that is yet to be called from the November 5th elections. As of right now, she leads Griffin by 734 votes out of more than 5.5 million ballots that were cast statewide. Yet Griffin is challenging more than 65,000 ballots in the case that he argues is, quote, unlawful. The state Supreme Court followed up on January the 22nd with an order rejecting Griffin's request for a writ of prohibition against the State Board of Elections, and the High Court instead agreed to send Griffin's case to a trial judge. His ballot challenges are now proceeding in the Wake County Superior Court. Now, the update that we've got on Friday from Griffin's lawyers, they wrote, quote, "This appeal became moot when the Supreme Court of North Carolina dismissed the petition for a writ of prohibition underlying this appeal. Questions about the district court remand order are now purely academic because this petition was not remanded to state court and has been fully resolved. Having been dismissed, this petition is no longer pending in the Supreme Court here in North Carolina, and it cannot be returned to federal court. While the case proceeds in state court, the January the 7th stay remains in effect." Griffin's lawyer wrote, "The stay preventing the board from mooting Judge Griffin's petition for judicial review does not change this analysis. The Supreme Court's authority to enter that stay did not depend on the remand order and issue in this appeal and would not have been affected by any ruling in this appeal." They went on to say the North Carolina Constitution gives the Supreme Court broad authority to oversee the separate litigation concerns the petition for judicial review pending in the Superior Court of Wake County. Put simply, a stay pending resolution of the petitions for judicial review does nothing to revive the already dismissed petition for writ of prohibition, which is the subject of the appeal. Griffin's motion to dismiss the Fourth Circuit appeal arrives 4 days after the court heard oral arguments in the case. We, of course, went over those on the show last week. A 3-judge panel spent about 90 minutes 1 week ago, last Monday afternoon, listening to arguments about the proper venue for resolving Griffin's case. As those judges went through and heard various details, again, it was a 90-minute oral argument that took place. And as of right now, we continue to wait for additional details from that court. And as soon as we get those additional details, we will pass them along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. In some other news that we are tracking this morning, after 484 days in captivity, Chapel Hill native Keith Samuel was freed alongside 2 other hostages in the 4th wave of releases under the Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement. Some reaction coming in from lawmakers. Senator Tom Tillis, in a statement on Saturday, said, quote, "Today, after more than a year in brutal captivity of Hamas, North Carolina native Keith Samuel is finally free and reunited with his family, including his beloved wife, Alviva. This is a moment of great relief and celebration, but we cannot forget about those remaining hostages. I'm confident that the Trump administration will continue to work closely with our ally Israel as it seeks to free every remaining hostage. This fragile ceasefire is completely dependent on the behavior of Hamas, and we must remain vigilant." Siegel is not only a Chapel Hill native, but was the first American hostage to be released from captivity under this ceasefire agreement. Siegel and his wife were taken captive on October the 7th, 2023, amongst 253 others captured by Hamas. His wife released after just 51 days in captivity. U.S. Senator Ted Budd also commenting on this on social media, saying, "We are overjoyed for Keith Samuel and his loved ones that this longtime nightmare that began on October the 7th, 2023, is finally over. Keith is now reunited with his wife and family, fulfilling the prayers of millions across the United States and around the world. Thank you to President Trump for delivering this decisive pressure that brought us to this day. I would also like to thank the U.S. State Department and intelligence community, as well as the governments of Israel, Egypt, and Qatar for their efforts." Budd said, quote, "I remain committed to securing the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza, especially 6 more Americans. They must not and will not be forgotten. I will continue to work to bring the terrorists who committed these acts to justice for their heinous crimes." 1 week ago, it was reported that Siegel would be among the hostages released on Saturday, February the 1st, and hostages have been released every weekend over the last couple of weeks, with that first round beginning on January the 19th, just 1 day before President Trump's inauguration, and an additional round released this past Thursday. So as we continue to track these details, other individuals still are awaiting release. As you heard there, the comments from Senator Tom Tillis and Ted Budd, there are still more Americans that remain hostage, 6 of them to be exact. When exactly they are slated to release, we are not exactly sure. In the case of how this process unfolds, the hostages are first handed over to the Red Cross in Gaza before the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, confirmed that they were in custody. Although Siegel appears to have lost weight, he waved and smiled as Hamas transferred him to the Red Cross. The IDF stated that all 3 hostages that were released this past Saturday, February the 1st, would be reunited with their families and taken to hospitals in Israel for continued medical care. There are some pretty amazing and very emotional photos that have made their way onto social media. I encourage you to check those out on our website this morning, CarolinaJournal.com. You can see a video, or a picture rather, of Keith Samuel and his wife embracing each other after they have been separated for more than 440 days with this atrocity unfolding in the Middle East. Again, you can read the story and check out some of those amazing pictures over on our website this morning, CarolinaJournal.com, where it's now 5:43, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We'll get another look at traffic from the very generous Boomer Von Cannon on this Monday morning.
That was their Bernie Bowles production there, brother.
Thanks to Bernie as well, of course.
You're welcome. He's the mastermind behind that thing.
It's 5:50. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We continue to track recovery efforts out in western North Carolina. We've been talking about that now for the better part of 6 months. And we did get an update on Friday from Governor Josh Stein as he announced a new $30 million small business grant program that will help some of those that continue to struggle out in the western half of the state. In his announcement, the governor said, quote, "Small businesses are the heart of western North Carolina and need our support to get through these slow winter months. The Western North Carolina Small Business Grant Program will help these businesses with their urgent needs and support the region's economic recovery. I am proud these state dollars are leveraging additional Dogwood Trust dollars, and I'm grateful to Dogwood for its leadership." Last fall, the Dogwood Health Trust created the Western North Carolina Small Business Initiative with grant funding for small businesses. Unfortunately, because there was so much damage, so much destruction, those funds have since been exhausted. The governor said that the state would be partnering with the Dogwood Health Trust by contributing $20 million, while the Asheville-based nonprofit will be adding an additional $10 million for a pool of small business grants totaling, well, $30 million. Small businesses with annual revenues of up to and including $2.5 million a year are eligible to apply for grants of up to $50,000 from the program. Businesses that were impacted by Helene lost over $13 billion in revenue, and these grants will help businesses make payroll, pay various operating expenses, and of course, one of the main efforts here, stabilizing the local economy as the tourism industry slowly starts to rebuild and regain after everything that it has been through. Funds will be managed by the Appalachian Community Capital Group with partnerships of various other funds across the area to dole this out. As I mentioned, businesses with that annual revenue of up to $2.5 million are eligible, and you must be in one of 28 counties. Also included in that, the eastern band of Cherokee Indians. Other organizations that have helped small businesses affected by Helene include Lowe's Home Improvement, which established a $2.5 million grant fund in November of last year. Stein also announced that the state is awarding $3 million to Baptists on Mission, as well as another $3 million to Habitat for Humanity NC, as both of those groups work on their housing repair initiatives. More help should be headed to that area. The General Assembly back in December overrode Roy Cooper's veto of Senate Bill 382, which allocated $227 million for disaster relief in western North Carolina. The new governor, Josh Stein, created the WNC group to focus on recovery efforts instead of having NCORE take on more work. And despite GrowNC's commitment to leading Hurricane Helene recovery, and they're going to, of course, be trying to do that during in a much more efficient and effective manner than what we saw from previous disasters in the eastern half of the state. We continue to track those recovery details, and we've got a link on our website this morning for the portal where individuals can apply to those grant programs out in western North Carolina. You can read that. The headline over at carolinajournal.com is Stein announces $30 million small business grant program for Helene-affected businesses. If you or somebody you know could take place in that, head on over to our website and click the link. It's carolinajournal.com. In some other news this morning, the American Civil Liberties Union of North Carolina, or ACLU, has criticized the Chancellor of Chapel Hill, Lee Roberts' comments last week in which he indicated he intends to comply with federal law and ICE officials. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security issued a directive rolling back the Biden administration's policies that prevented ICE officials from making arrests in what were deemed, quote, sensitive areas, such as schools and churches. The statement from DHS reads, quote, these actions empower the brave men and women of CBP and ICE to enforce our immigration laws and catch criminal aliens, including murderers and rapists who have illegally come into our country. Criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrest. The Trump administration will not tie the hands of our brave law enforcement and instead trust them to use common sense. Roberts, the chancellor of UNC Chapel Hill, said in a statement to WRAL last week, quote, "If we're asked by law enforcement, we're going to comply with any requests from law enforcement about that or anything else. We're going to follow the law. That's been our consistent posture." On Thursday, the ACLU of North Carolina sent a letter to Chancellor Robert criticizing his remarks. In part, the letter says, quote, "A decision to prioritize voluntary cooperation with ICE over protecting the well-being of students, staff, and faculty is deeply troubling and exposes the university to legal risk. As detailed in this letter, broad compliance by UNC Chapel Hill with ICE or CBP requests for student information will likely violate multiple of federal laws." According to Roberts, UNC has approximately 3,000 international students, including both undergrad and graduate students, making up about 10% of the university's total population. These students may be affected by other Trump administration policies related to travel and visas, and UNC officials told WRAL that enhanced security measures and additional screening checks could lead to longer processing times. Roberts said in his final statements, when it comes to conflict of law questions, we'll seek legal counsel and be guided appropriately by experts. While I can't really put myself in the shoes of someone whose immigration status might be affected by change in policies, I'm well aware of the anxiety, and we've heard a lot about it, and we're going to continue to serve our immigrant students and scholars as best as we can. You can read the full letter from the American Civil Liberties Union Foundation by visiting our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. Well, that's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6 a.m. right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.